Hello, I'm Belinda. So I've been basically backpacking Australia for almost like a year. So since then, obviously, I've learned a lot of things, and so I thought I would compile it into like a little list. So here are 10 things that I learned while I was in Australia, especially as a Singaporean or an Asian. So, number one, people there are really friendly, especially coming from Singapore or any Asian countries where we're so used to everyone just keeping to themselves. Australians are really open to just chatting, having a small talk, or even people in general over there, like even the other tourists. They're really friendly. Like, you can just go up to them and just start talking, and you'll make a friend, which is pretty cool. Whereas, like over here in Singapore, if you just go up to someone on the street and start talking, they'll be like, what the hell is wrong with you? Yeah, I guess that's one thing to take note, is that people there are really friendly. Obviously, there's like people that are mean over there, but in general, they're friendlier than at least Asian countries. And yeah, so moving on to number two, which is work-life balance. So coming from Singapore or any Asian country, it was definitely a shock to me, because at least over here in Singapore, working overtime is such, I guess, like a culture, or in a way like you're expected to work overtime with your job, and so you don't really have time for your hobbies or anything, which I really didn't like. But yeah, like I'm really surprised, or it was really a shock to me when I found out that they really respected the work-life balance. So they really prioritize having a life outside of work. Like once it's time to stop working, you actually stop working. Obviously there are still people that do overtime and whatnot, but then it depends what your job is. What I mean is, like, in general, people really do respect the work-life balance. Like, I remember I was there 4 years ago for my internship. I was interning at a college, and school ends at like 3 or 3:30. I remember I was having a tummy ache, so I went to the bathroom and I came out after 3:30, I think. Keep in mind, before I went in, like, school was still in full swing, everyone was still in class and whatnot, teachers were walking down the hallways. And when I came out after 3:30, I shit you not, I thought there was like a fire or something that went wrong, because all of a sudden it's so deserted. There was no one around the school, and I was actually worried. I did not know what happened, because at least in Singapore, when school ends, they don't really end on time. Even if it ends on time, we normally have remedial classes or extra classes, or even extracurricular activities, CCAs. So that's what I thought would happen. I thought I would come out and everyone would still be around, but no, they actually went home. Like, school actually ended on time. Everyone actually got out of the school within 5-10 minutes of school ending. So that was a huge surprise to me. And teachers weren't there as well. Normally teachers would be hanging back in Singapore marking papers or something, I don't know. But it was honestly a huge eye-opener for me that it's completely different over there, and I honestly really love that about Australia. But yeah, so that's number two. So moving on to number three, which is how expensive Australia is. So I'm pretty sure if anyone has visited Australia, you know how expensive food is. But it's not just that. Like, obviously it's expensive to eat out, but I thought that since there are farmers in Australia that grow their own food, that it would be cheaper to buy your own groceries and then make it yourself. Like in Singapore, I get why groceries are expensive in a way, because a lot of our stuff are imported, whereas in Australia, like, they grow their own food and whatnot. So I thought that it would be way cheaper, but that's actually not the case. Like, I don't know why their groceries are so expensive, but yeah, that really shocked me. So it's not just eating out that's expensive, it's also really expensive to buy groceries. And on top of that, it's also really expensive to rent, or accommodations are actually really expensive. I mean, sure, you can get cheap like hostels or whatnot, but then I'm sure those cheap ones, you'll probably have to sleep in like a room of 12 people or even more. or like mixed dorm rooms or anything, but if you're looking at normal 4-bedroom or whatnot, it's still really expensive. Like the hostels that I was at, I only got bedrooms with like 4 people, and there was one hostel that I chose that had like 8 people in it, but the other 2 hostels that I stayed at, it was like a 4-people bedroom. And still, I guess because with the 8-people bedroom that I chose, that was like during the peak season in Australia, so it was really expensive, and so I could only go for the 8-people option. But all 3, I stayed one like around a month or 2 each, and they were averaging about 1,300 Australian dollars. So that's a lot, especially for a hostel. Like you're not even getting a room to yourself. But yeah, it's crazy how expensive hostels are, or rent in general. So if you're planning to go to Australia and staying at a hostel or whatnot, keep that in mind. So yeah, moving on to number 4, which is rent. So on top of rent being stupid expensive, it's also extremely hard to rent a place to yourself, or even sharing rent or whatnot, because I guess it's because of COVID. Like now that the restrictions are lifted up, everyone around the world is just flooding to Australia, and so renting is extremely competitive. Like I totally gave up trying to rent after a few months, because it's honestly like a race. Like I know of people, and even I myself at times, I had to like camp on like Facebook pages and whatnot, or different websites where you can go to like look for people renting their places. People actually camp for like new listings, and when they have a new listing, people just go ham. Like I think I was talking to one guy, there was a viewing that I went for a room. He was telling me he posted the listing, and within an hour, I think over 30 people messaged him. And then there was another instance where I heard from like a colleague. She said that she went for a viewing of this apartment, and the person was telling her how he posted it at night, and when he woke up in the morning, just overnight, he got over 300 messages. And I shit you not, like I'm not exaggerating, and I'm very sure a lot of people that have tried to rent in Australia will agree to what I'm saying, because it's honestly so difficult. Like I'm very sure I've replied to over hundreds of people's listings, and only like 10% get back to me. And within that 10%, majority of them are like, oh sorry, it's already taken. So it's extremely frustrating, and that's why I gave up on renting in Australia. And yeah, just keep that in mind, that it's not easy to find an accommodation, or in terms of renting in Australia, it's very difficult for you to get. However, there are a few people that I know, they just arrived in Australia and they managed to get a viewing within the next day or so. So there are some people that are really lucky with renting in Australia, but I'm just not one of them. Okay, so moving on to number 5, which is no one gives a shit. So just be yourself. So what I mean by that is that everyone in Australia is really accepting in a way. So you'll see people really expressing themselves in the way they dress and everything, and everyone's fine with that. Whereas in Asian cultures, it's like you just try not to stand out as much in terms of the way you behave or the way you dress, because if not, then you'll get like a few weird looks here and there. But in Australia, like they're really okay with that. And besides, like everyone have their own things going on in their lives, things for them to worry about. So it's not always about you, or it's not like all the focus is on you. So just keep that in mind. Like when I first went to Australia, like I was so worried about like eating in the park alone or whatnot, but everyone's fine with that. Like no one really cares. So just do you. Just go ahead and do whatever you want. Like I thought I would get a few weird stares here and there for like eating in a park alone, or just being alone exploring around Australia. Like I thought that I would get judged or anything, but to my surprise, as stupid as it sounds, it was okay. Like no one really cares. You just go ahead and explore on your own, or do whatever you want to do. And yeah, so moving on to number 6. So it sounds stupid, but coming from an Asian country, obviously there's a lot of Asians around. Whereas when I went over to Australia, I think it's like the first time ever that I realized like, oh, I'm actually different. I guess that just never crossed my mind. Like I know that I'm Asian, of course, but like I guess I never really thought about it that way. Because when I went to the hostel, like I would notice that I would get people just like looking at me, And at first I was like, is there something wrong with my face? But then after a while I'm like, oh, maybe that's because I'm Asian, and staying at a hostel, there's not a lot of Asians. And most of the time when I'm in the hostel, like I'm the only Asian there. So that's when like I realized like, oh, maybe it's because I'm Asian that they're looking at me. Because at the same time when they look at me, it's like they're like, oh, what the heck? Like as if like I'm a rare species or something. But I guess in a way I am, because normally when I'm at the hostels, I'm one of the only Asians, or if not one of the few Asians that are there. So I guess that's really interesting for me to realize, or it was a really interesting experience, because I never really thought about that until like I went to Australia. But yeah, so moving on to number 7 is the importance of connections. I'm sure a lot of people know how important connections are, but I guess it really hit me that when I was in Australia, because like I mentioned, like I would always be like the only Asian, or if not one of the few Asians in the hostels. And I guess like a lot of people have the perception or the impression that Asians are really quiet or somewhat antisocial or antisocial. So I don't get approached a lot, in the sense of like people striking conversations with me, and not a lot of people would talk to me in a way, because like I guess to them Asians don't really mingle. And while at the same time, like right in front of my eyes, strangers would go up to one another like, oh hey, how's it going, like, oh, what are you doing over there, like, oh, what are you cooking and whatnot. Whereas for me it's always just silence. Like I guess in a way it's peaceful if you enjoy it, but then again, like it's in a way I guess it's more difficult for me to make connections with people, because not a lot of people talk to me. Like that's fine, I'm okay with it, but at the same time it's like because of that I guess I in a way lose out on making connections with people. Obviously I can make connections still, but it would be more effort on my end. Like I would actually really have to go up to people every single time and be like, oh hey, how's it going? Because if I don't talk to them, then no one's gonna talk to me. I mean, yeah, I did that, but it's just tiring if I have to keep constantly doing it over and over every single day. So I still did it, but obviously I wouldn't have made as much connections as other people. So moving on to number 8, basically what I learned is that you can actually have a full-on career in Australia. Like the more I talked to people or I mingled around, and with the jobs that I had, I realized like how many people, not a lot, but there are still people that actually went backpacking in Australia and then they ended up finding their dream job, or even worked at a job and they really liked it, and so they actually settled down with that job, and that company or that job like sponsored them a visa to actually continue working in Australia, and that's how they actually started their career. I've spoken to a few that they were backpacking Australia, they landed a job, and they've been there since. Like they've been there for almost a decade already, so that's pretty cool. I guess to me, when I went to Australia, I just have the mindset of like, oh yeah, like everyone just comes here on a working holiday visa, finish their time over here, and then they just go back. I guess it never really occurred to me that some people might actually stay and continue their jobs, or even use this opportunity to get the company to sponsor them a visa, and when they actually stay in Australia long enough, they actually get their permanent residency, or even some of them like they get the Australian citizenship. So it was really cool. Like when I heard about it, I was just like surprised. Like it's really cool, especially if migrating to Australia or any other countries, no one really thinks about that, but I guess it's a really cool way to actually get a citizenship. Moving on to number 9. This one honestly surprised me the most. So number 9 is basically how much of a bitch flies are. At least in Singapore, like the flies, they are annoying for sure, but they'll just fly around and you can just shoo them away or whatnot. And like the flies in Singapore, they normally just fly around randomly, or if not, they'll just try to go to your food. Whereas flies in Australia are a whole different breed. Like, oh my god, are they hella annoying. Like they actually fly straight to your face and they'll just fly to your eyes. Like I don't know what's up with like flies in Australia. They're hella annoying. They actually attack you. honestly, that surprised me how annoying flies are in Australia and how many flies there are. Not just that, like another thing is how many spiders there are. I mean, you hear about Australia having a lot of bugs and whatnot, memes about all the bugs in Australia, but when you actually see the amount of bugs there are, it's not like obviously it's not like they're always everywhere. It's just like some parts, like a lot of the cars in Australia, like the side mirrors, there's always spider webs. And I was just like, what the heck? I've never seen that before. Or like even in the bathroom, sometimes you see like spider webs. I shit you not, there was one time when I was at a person's house, like I was at the front door, and I saw a black widow on top of the door. I was so surprised because it was just chilling on top of someone's door. Oh, and another thing that really surprised me was how mosquitoes in Australia are plus sized. In Singapore, when you see mosquitoes, like you can barely see them. For sure you can still see them, but it's not as obvious as Australia. So I don't know what it is about Australian bugs, they're just like all plus sized. But at least I guess the good thing about the mosquitoes in Australia is that although I've seen a lot of them flying around, I don't think I've actually been bit by one. Whereas in Singapore, they're really small, but at the same time you get bitten a lot, or at least I have. And within like the year that I was in Australia, I don't think I've gotten a mosquito bite before. So that's actually really surprising because when I first saw the mosquitoes, I was really scared. But thank God I didn't get bitten by them, so that's good. And yeah, so moving on to the last point, which is number 10. You do you. What you normally see online when people go traveling, it's like, oh, they'll have so much fun, they'll have like the time of their lives and whatnot. But then again, you never really think about it, but at the same time it depends on your lifestyle. So for me, I thought I'll be doing that, like having the time of my life, going out and everything. But then when I went there, I realized like, wait a minute, I don't like drinking, I don't like partying, so how am I gonna have the time of my life? If you're anything like me, where you don't really like going out at night, partying or even drinking, you honestly feel really lonely at times. Like, cause at least with backpackers, a lot of them are party goers or drinkers, and especially for me, I'm someone that don't like doing any of those. I find it really hard to click with people. Like, sure, I can make friends or whatnot, but how would I hang out with them? Because our perception of fun is so different. I'm perfectly fine and I would be more than happy to have like a picnic by the botanic gardens or by the beach or anything, but what's fun to them is drinking at night, going to clubs, partying, dancing and everything, which was not my fun. And so even though I made friends, I always feel left out because whenever they would want to hang out, they would go drinking or partying, and I'll just be alone in not my own room since I was staying in a hostel, but I would just always be alone. And in a way, I always felt left out because like when they would go partying or drinking, they would get even closer to one another. Whereas for me, because I don't do that, after a while I'll get left out from the friend group or whatnot, or I'll just lose that connection with that friend. So it's really sad. It was somewhat challenging for me because as much as I want to make friends, I didn't want to push myself to do something that I know I don't enjoy. And so I guess I really learned, like, as much as you want friends or whatnot, you shouldn't have to change yourself to fit in. If you guys don't enjoy the same things, you don't have to force yourself to. It's fine being alone as well. Like, just because you're alone doesn't mean you're lonely. But yeah, so that's basically 10 things that I learned while I was in Australia. Obviously there's many more, but I thought I should just list 10. But yeah, hopefully you find it interesting, and peace.